that's kind of a problem. It can be a valid docx, but also these other things. We do have some mitigations for this. It's something we kind of thought about when we were considering these threats. So there's just kind of a few things I called out there. But and it really comes down to kind of making sure you have your MIME type set correctly. But it's something to keep in mind if you need to do something in this scenario. Cool. Still have some time left, so I want to talk about, you know, a lot of times us security guys focus on the negatives. And, and this slide is a little more sort of, more asking questions and more forward-looking than any sort of real thing that I know for sure. But I thought there's some kind of interesting points to talk about here when it comes to RIA and sort of the developments here, and maybe what are some signs of progress here security-wise. So one concept I think about a lot is the idea of security defects that are due to the mixing of code and data. I think I first read about this in writing secure code. I'm sure that's probably not where it came from. I'm sure it predates, the idea predates that for a while. But it's always kind of struck with me, and I find people don't talk about it a whole lot. But yeah, if you think about buffer overruns, for example, a big part of the reason buffer overruns are so much of a problem is that we had the stack that was a mixture of basically, you know, jump pointers and data. And what that meant was it's very easy to make sort of these cookie cutter buffer overflow exploits where, hey, I overflow this buffer and now I control this pointer. If the pointers were stored in a completely different place than the data, then buffer overflow still wouldn't be great, but it would be a lot trickier to have kind of these cookie cutter exploits, right? It would more be a matter of, well, I can affect this data by overflowing this buffer, and, you know, maybe by controlling this data I can control this other thing. But you know, but it makes buffer overflows like much less of a cookie cutter problem. XSS is the same kind of thing. I mean, what we're really talking about there is JavaScript injection, and you know, the idea that I just want to display, all I want to do is display something on my HTML page, right? But the fact that some attacker, you know, is able to get JavaScript in there, like I don't want to run any code, right? I just want to display HTML. Like you know, why are those so intermingled? SQL injection, same kind of thing. So I had to call out Jason just because this, you know, it's kind of by design. This is how it works, right? Here's some data. Oh, just execute this string and you'll have the data. You know, trust me. So I did want to point out there are some advances in this area that it's, you know, it's not quite as bad as all that, and there's things that people are doing to help the situation. But the nice thing about RIA is that these are more separate by default. With HTML, like HTML is kind of a document model, right? I fetch a document and it contains script, and the script runs, the document is viewable, and that's great. And that's kind of where that code and data commingling comes in. With the RIA model, it's more like, okay, I fetch the app and it's going to go make various SOAP, REST requests, etc. And the data is kind of nice and separate from the code. There's not that clear pathway. Another thing I want to talk about a little bit is just kind of some of the higher level abstractions that are happening kind of alongside all this RIA stuff. There's a lot of kind of these different frameworks that are coming out that I think the jury's still out on exactly what the world's going to look like once these get adopted, or how well they get adopted. But for example, I know there's a lot of stuff going on in the authentication authorization space. This whole claims-based security thing sounds interesting. You know, Microsoft has this thing called Geneva that we're working on. OpenID is another kind of idea like this, where it's like, okay, I don't want to really handle this authentication stuff by myself. I'm going to use sort of these other providers, and we're able to rely on people who know what they're doing, and not everyone has to go write their own authentication mechanisms. So I think this was like an every ASP.NET book from like 10 years ago, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. But the way the web was then, it was kind of almost, you know, insecure by default. It was like developers were encouraged to write bad code like this almost. Along with the RIA stuff is also coming, and this isn't just RIA specific, right? But the idea that you can kind of sit on your left hand and write a CRUD app, that makes it kind of hard for SQL injection problems to get in, right? I'm hoping that devs, especially the more entry-level types, who just need to get some basic data flow to their database up and going, like there's kind of a clearer path to be more successful security-wise here. And these are, as I said, this is mostly just kind of thinking out loud. There are some kind of dangers with these abstractions. One thing, particularly with Silverlight, is the fact that since Silverlight supports C#, which is cool, it encouraged a lot of ASP.NET developers to sort of write client-side C# as well, which is great, but there is kind of the chance that we might blur some of the lines between client and server in some cases. And as I talked about before, like, you have to realize there's, it's easier to store secrets on the server than on the client. Also, abstractions can be leaky. There may be stuff going on under the hood that you're not, don't know exactly what's going on there. That could cause problems. Another problem here is as we add more components that people depend on, the updating model becomes important. I think a lot of us have the ATL issue fresh in our minds. I'm sure a lot of people in this room, did a lot of the work to help clean that up. And unfortunately, the updating story is often kind of an afterthought for these kinds of things. So I'm curious to see how that develops. Cool. So just had a few quick conclusions. DOM access, very important. When you switch on the DOM, make sure you know what you're doing. Make sure you know who you trust. Peleus covered a lot of the different kinds of cross-domain permissions and how they can work together. Make sure you understand where your sensitive content is and tailor your cross-domain permissions around that. Remember that everything here is plain text, no secrets, and if you have a site where you're allowing user uploads, make sure you're aware of what that means when they're hosted on your domain. So I think that's about what we had. Do we have some questions? Or do you want? Oh yeah, I got some references. And these are just kind of pointers to our security documentation for Flash and Silverlight respectively.